Yeah, no one submits offer sheets in the NHL, but would you offer sheet any of these restricted free agents? Philip Hronek coming off a career year playing with Quinn Hughes. How about Lucas Raymond and Mo Seider? Both restricted free agents. And then Carolina, Seth Jarvis with those 33 goals, Marty Necas, 24 goals, still restricted free agents. We're going to talk about that and more with our hockey insider, Pierre LeBrun. First of all, Pierre, terrific haircut, and thanks for being on the show.
No one's going to put an offer sheet on this haircut, that's for sure. It's funny. We get an offer sheet about once every decade, and when it happens, it's like, oh my goodness. Montreal, of course, offer sheeting Sebastian Aho a number of years ago, and then Carolina waiting patiently and getting their revenge by offer sheeting Jesperi Kotkaniemi and then signing him to an 8-year deal. That hasn't worked out great so far for the Hurricanes, but that was the revenge of Tom Dundon, the owner of the Hurricanes of Montreal. And I'm just pointing that out because I think the rest of the league looks at that and says, yeah, that's why we don't do offer sheets. That's just the owners get involved and it gets silly and you get revenge signings. We love it.
Yes.
Jay, we love it.
I mean,
but it's why you rarely see them.
I mean, I thought the offer sheets would end when Brian Burke wanted to fight Kevin Lowe over Dustin Penner, but I mean, that's a whole other story.
Oh my goodness. I remember covering that for the Canadian Press, and the quotes I was getting from Brian Burke and Kevin Lowe through that. I should have retired after covering that story, to be honest, because nothing was going to be as entertaining the rest of my career.
Maybe they'll get to it at some point later in their lives. They'll get to it and they'll fight for charity. That would be really fun. Pierre, we want to talk about these restricted free agents. I want to talk specifically about Marty Necas. We showed it to you. 24 goals this year. He's got 52 goals over the previous 2 years. He's made it pretty clear he'd like to move on from Carolina, and there are a lot of teams interested in acquiring his services, including, Pierre, maybe some Canadian teams in the mix.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a moment. Let's be clear, Jay. He's not made it clear himself, nor his agent, but his father made it clear in the Czech media during the World Championships. Having said that, from having made some calls, yes, he would appreciate a change of scenery. And in fact, that goes back several months. I mean, this is not new. It's just that it's getting more attention now. As you may remember, he was actually the centerpiece. It got leaked that when Carolina was talking to Vancouver about a potential Elias Pettersson trade, Necas was part of it from the Carolina side, among other pieces. But, of course, I don't think that trade ever came close to happening. I think it was always from the Vancouver end about trying to convince Pettersson to sign. But, yes, my understanding from talking to teams around the league the last few days, at least half of the teams in the National Hockey League have checked in with Carolina over the past 7 to 10 days.
Wow.
On Martin Necas because of everything we just talked about. And that makes sense. Now, how many of those teams want to double back and get serious, we'll see. And yes, my understanding is that Montreal and Calgary are two teams that have interest in Martin Necas. The question now is, do they want to get serious, or, was that just a phone call to say, keep us in the loop, right? But, in terms of Montreal, he fits the age bracket of what the Canadiens continue to do here, right? I mean, he would fit in nicely if they could find a way. Calgary is fascinating because also he's a player that fits in with the kind of retooling the Flames are doing. Necas was part of the package that Carolina was willing to spend to get Matthew Tkachuk 2 years ago, Jay, from Calgary, under then GM Brad Treliving. It came down to Florida and Carolina for the services of Matthew Tkachuk, and we know that Florida got him. But Martin Necas at the time was part of a package that Carolina offered to Calgary, more of a futures deal with the young Martin Necas. So keep that in mind.
You mentioned Matthew Tkachuk. Interesting story about his brother Brady that blew up over the weekend and turned out to really be nothing. But the concept was that Brady might get traded to his hometown of St. Louis, Missouri. That's his hometown. That's where his dad played. That's where his family still lives. But as you wrote in The Athletic, Pierre, the idea is very far-fetched.
Well, what I wrote is I reached out to Steve Stais, Jay. I wanted to know what he thought of it all. And I can tell you that the president of hockey operations and GM of the Senators wasted no time in responding and responded, I'm not going to say angrily, but certainly in a very clear way, calling it complete BS and saying that there's absolutely no trade talks happening with his captain. He reiterated what he said in February. Remember, in February, he was asked about Brady Tkachuk trade rumors, and he said he intends to continue to retool his team around his captain, not without him. So he really slammed the door shut on that. But, I mean, let's be fair. I think we know there are people in St. Louis who would love to see that, and that's why these things might flare up from time to time, especially if the Senators have another disappointing season, right? I think this conversation, might be more interesting in a year, and that's just me. That's not anyone telling me that. But in the moment, there appears to be absolutely nothing to that, and nothing coming out of Brady Tkachuk's camp, Jay. He is very much an Ottawa Senators, and, we'll see where it goes.
The owner of the new Utah NHL franchise, Ryan Smith, was on the Pat McAfee show on TSN this week, and he says that they have narrowed the nickname for the potential team, Pierre, down to 4 names, and he even said what 2 of the names were. He said the Yeti and the Mammoth were 2 of the names. First of all, what are your thoughts about either of those 2 names? Do you like them, Pierre, LeBrun?
I love the Yeti, and let me tell you something. I think even if Utah traded for Austin Matthews tomorrow, the name of the team in Utah might be of more interest to a lot of people, because that's how big that story is right now. I'm kidding. They're not trading for Austin Matthews, but you understand my point. There is such a fascination for when Utah will finally get its name. And it's worth mentioning this again, that Ryan Smith told me this back in the hours after getting the Coyotes, that he's willing to start next season without a team name. If it takes that long to get the fan survey to work its way through, so be it. But there's obviously a chance it'll be figured out by then. But they might be the busiest team in the NHL this summer. They have more than $40 million of salary cap space. Jay, what would you do with more than $40 million in salary cap space? I spoke with Bill Armstrong, the GM, this week, and the one thing he said is they're not going to get crazily carried away. They're not going to be drunken sailors here with all that cap money. They are going to be aggressive. They have holes to fill. Their entire blue line is unsigned, Jay. They don't have a single NHL defenseman signed right now on their roster. And that includes Sean Durzi, who they have to re-sign. But one of the things Bill Armstrong really, really, really stressed is, yes, they're going to poke away on July 1st in free agency. They're going to use their cap space, maybe trade for some guys, some teams who need to create cap space. But they really want to stay respectful to the rebuild that they started 3 years ago. They're going into year 4 of this rebuild. They have a young core. So if they dip into free agency, and they will, they want to go short term, 1, 2, maybe a 3-year deal. And what they want to do is, if a player gets offered X amount of money over 3 years from another team, they'll pay him the same total dollars, let's say over 2 years. So higher AAV. That's going to be their hook. They're going to try and get guys on higher salaries, shorter term, fill up their roster. But what they don't want to do is wake up in 4 years when that young core is ready to go next level and they have to be paid, and have all these lasting older free agent deals, veteran players that don't fit the picture anymore. So they're going to be really careful and not lose their minds despite having the most salary cap space in the entire NHL.
Pierre, I'll tell you what I'd do with $40 million of salary cap space. I'd put down the biggest offer sheet in the history of the league, but that's just me. I'm a gambler. You wrote...
I wish you were running an NHL team.
Me too. Maybe someday you and I both will be. Pierre, you wrote last week about the potential unrestricted free agents this offseason, some of the big names. Jake Gensel, we've talked about him all year long. Such interesting names out of Vancouver, Pierre. Lindholm, Tyler Myers, Nikita Zadorov, Tyler Bertuzzi, Max Domi in Toronto. We know that scouting combine is coming up next week in Buffalo. I know you're going to be there. Do you feel like there will potentially be some news developing at that combine, considering so many GMs and so many agents will be present?
Yeah, certainly what I can tell you, Jay, is that in the conversations we've had here this week, that there are a number of agents who are lining up meetings with front office people to say, okay, let's pick up that conversation in Buffalo on this UFA and that UFA. And often what will come out from that scouting combine is either a deal starts to finally take place to have a guy resign and stay in place where he's been playing and avoid going to market, or you start to get clarity the other way if you're the team. You come out of that scouting combine after meeting face to face with the agent, and you're like, oh darn, we're not signing this guy. And it's a bit of a terrifying moment for teams sometimes because they thought they had lots of time to sign him before July 1st, and it's like there's nothing like a face to face meeting. And so this is an underrated time of the year. It doesn't mean that everything will come out and everything's made public, but believe me, when I look back at a lot of off-season decisions, a lot of them stem from these face-to-face meetings in Buffalo. So it will be intriguing next week.
I'm looking forward to chatting with you. We're going to talk to Pierre after he returns from Buffalo, from his trip in Buffalo. We'll have lots to discuss. Are you an Anchor Bar guy, Pierre, like me, or are you a Duff's guy?
I'm going to go Duff's there.
Okay.
I'm a Duff's guy. I should be neither, by the way, at this point in my life. But if you're going to force me to pick, I'm going to go Duff's.
Okay, I feel like you should indulge because you deserve it. You've been great for us all year. We'll chat with you next week. Safe travels to Western New York.
Right on, right on.
When we return on the program, Roland Garros highlights. We